Hey everyone, so today's video is going to be a bit different from usual, because I'm not going to be focusing on Star Citizen itself too much, but instead on the hardware that I use to run it. Anyone who plays this game knows that it's very demanding to run, so I was excited to see some of the new offerings from AMD and Nvidia come out, which might help us get some more frames in the vert. So today I finally got my hands on a 3080, and I'm going to be comparing it to what I was previously using to run the game, which was the 1080 Ti. I do want to start with a disclaimer though, that this game is definitely still in alpha and most of the development work is adding features at this point, not optimizing how well the game runs. And even with that being said, CIG are working on switching from DirectX 11 to Vulkan, which is a much newer and generally much more optimized graphics API. So you can expect a lot more performance, or at least a much better potential for performance once they get the game running on that. But that upcoming change is part of why I wanted to make this video, so that I can not only compare my graphics cards now, but I can have this as a reference as well for when they do get this game running on Vulkan, to possibly compare to that and see how things change. Before I get to the testing though, I do want to highlight CIG's awesome telemetry page, which is a really cool thing for them to share. So you can see here they collect a lot of performance data from players as they play, and they even keep track of your data for you. So if you want a general sense of how a specific configuration runs the game, or just even how your own configuration runs the game, this is a nice tool to look at, and I have it linked down below. The reason I'm not going to just use this though is because it doesn't let you control some things. So for the data from other people, you see a lot of variability even from people who have the same CPU and GPU. There are a lot of reasons that this could be the case, such as them running things in the background, to their storage speed and RAM amount and speed, to even things like where they spend the most of their time in the game. I'm sure you all know as well that this game runs a lot better when you're flying around in some asteroids than when you're walking around Area 18. So a player who spends most of their time in cities is going to look like they have a lot worse performance than someone who spends most of their time in space. So because of that, I wanted to just collect my own data and only collect it in a couple of locations for a shorter period of time, rather than just collecting all of the data from whenever I'm playing. So while these tests aren't going to be perfectly controlled, since I can't account for everything like how well the server that I'm playing on is doing and tons of other stuff that happens in this game that could make a slight difference, at least I'm going to be able to keep the location and everything else in my rig constant. So there's going to be at least some validity to my results, and they'll be good enough to use in the future when we're comparing to a hopefully much more optimized game. Anyway, so my setup is I have a Ryzen 3700X for my CPU, which should be enough in most games to keep stuff from being too CPU limited, although Star Citizen is a different story. And then I have 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm running the game on an NVMe SSD, and I'm running it at 1440p. So the first spot I checked out was the main area in the Commons here at Microtech, and I chose this area because it's very demanding, but it's also a pretty recent addition, so I think it better reflects how stuff is going to be than an older spot like Area 18 would. So here the averages were 34 FPS for the 1080 Ti and 35 for the 3080. However, the 1080 Ti was at 80% usage and the 3080 was at 50%, so something is definitely limiting performance here, and this low level of utilization is going to be a trend here. I think cities and other densely packed areas like this will really benefit from optimization in the future, because you can see from these results that they're definitely not optimized now. Okay, so the next thing I decided to test was just doing a flyover of New Babbage for similar reasons of it being a pretty demanding scenario, especially with all the weather effects you get on Microtech. There was a bit more of a difference this time with the 1080 Ti getting 37 FPS and the 3080 getting 41, but that's still not a massive improvement, and it doesn't follow the sort of scaling you'd expect between the two GPUs. So if you don't follow PC hardware too closely, the 3080 generally performs about 50% better than the 1080 Ti. So I did make sure that I wasn't having any driver issues or anything, because that can happen when you switch out GPUs. But I ran a couple of other benchmarks and everything was fine. So this is just another example of lack of optimization in Star Citizen, which I did expect to find, but I didn't think it would be this extreme. Again though, the performance difference between these GPUs is more reflected in their GPU usage than their actual frame rate, because the usage was 71% on the 1080 Ti and a measly 44% on the 3080. So the next scenario I tested was during quantum travel, so I just quantum traveled from Microtech to Crusader, but I made sure to only start recording data after the initial hiccup that I always seem to get when entering quantum. I'm assuming that's not just me and that happens to everyone, but let me know in the comments. Anyway, I just measured in the middle of quantum travel, not while I was entering or exiting it, and I got 61 FPS with the 1080 Ti and 66 with the 3080. Interestingly though, quantum travel does seem to be a bit more optimized than the other things that I looked at, because the usage was all the way at 96% on the 1080 Ti, which is actually what you'd see in an optimized game. But the 3080 again wasn't being fully utilized, and it was actually all the way down at 51%. Now the next thing I wanted to test was combat in space, since that's a very important part of Star Citizen, and I thought that doing a Claimjumper mission would be a good idea since they're normally pretty similar and you always get the same enemies spawning. However, I don't think this test is as representative of the actual performance as the other ones, because I think a lot of the results came down to how close I let the prospectors follow me, because I noticed the frames dipping a lot when they were all swarmed around me and causing a ton of shield effects to have to be rendered from where they were shooting me. So take these results with an even bigger grain of salt. Also, the usage here was incredibly low on the 3080 at 37%. You'd almost think I was just watching a video or something based on that. So yeah, I had thought that space combat was one of the more optimized things in Star Citizen, but it turns out that based on these numbers, it's just actually less demanding than other things that you have to render in the game, which is why you get decent performance even with this terrible utilization. So yeah, I'm excited to see how smooth things are in space combat once the game is optimized. Okay, so the last thing I just kind of threw in here because I logged in my Hammerhead, and even without a frame rate counter, I noticed immediately how well the game was running, so I just wanted to include it, because I didn't even know that you could get these kind of frame rates in this game. Just look at how smooth the animation to get in and out of this chair is here. Anyway, so I just did my testing sitting down at this desk here, and I ended up with 107 FPS with the 1080 Ti and 114 with the 3080. So again, it's still not scaling how it should, but the utilization here with the 1080 Ti was really high again, while still being pretty low on the 3080. So overall, the 3080 doesn't deliver a massive bump in performance, at least in Star Citizen, so don't be too worried if you can't find one in stock, because you're really not missing out on much. And actually, if the only intensive game that you play right now is Star Citizen, then I wouldn't even recommend upgrading, because it's really not worth it. This is definitely going to change as the game becomes better optimized, and hopefully when they get it running with Vulkan, things will be a lot better, but for now, GPU power is not really what's limiting you past a certain point. But yeah, my initial intention with this video was just to compare the two cards, but what ended up being more interesting to me at least was how unoptimized parts of the game are. Like, I knew the cities were bad because it's pretty obvious with how bad the performance is there, but I would have never guessed that the optimization was just as bad in space. This makes me excited to see how well the game will run once they start optimizing it, because there's a lot of room to do so. So I'll be happy when I'm making a follow-up video on this, and I think it'll be nice to have some data from previous patches to compare to. I do hope Vulkan ends up being a nice performance bump, because the level of hardware required to run the game right now can be a pretty big barrier to entry, and it would be nice to not have such a big barrier. I think it's even in CIG's best interest, because more players means more funding, but it's hard to tell how much or how little they're prioritizing this, since they haven't gotten the new roadmap out yet. One good thing though is that as time goes on, hardware only gets better, so that's one benefit to the game still being pretty far off from release. The hardware should have plenty of time to catch up so that mainstream stuff will be able to run this game really well. Let me know you guys' thoughts on this in the comments though, and feel free to share any PC related stuff really. I'm almost as much of a computer enthusiast as I am a Star Citizen enthusiast, so I enjoy this kind of stuff a lot too. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.